It was kind of a weird week, wasn't it? Or at least it felt really strange with the August WASDE report coming out on Monday. We spent the next few days after the report came out trying to figure out what were they thinking about, and then about what were we thinking about the numbers, and why did USDA do that to that and not that? And in the midst of all of that, the picture for corn and soybeans just kept getting bleaker and bleaker by the day. Kohli and Cavanaugh are standing by with their perspective on the report and their sage wisdom, having been through down markets. Guys, are brought to you by the Allen County Farm Bureau. They've been really busy down at the State Fair, but everybody's coming back as the State Fair is ending. Good fair this year as well. Celebrating contributions that Hoosier farm families have provided for food, fuel, and clothing, not only to our state, but the world at large as well. Hey, support your local Farm Bureau with a membership. Simply go online to itpaystobeamember.org. Well, David, I know you got plenty of numbers there. You are always gracious enough to make a great spreadsheet for John and I as we take a look at that. But one of the things that I kind of harkened back on, David, this past week as we got the numbers out was one of the conversations that we had just recently was about the flooding that we saw in Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, and so forth. And apparently it was the NAS satellite data that indicated where all that flood damage was, indicating as well that it was only 130,000 acres that were impacted, so not even enough to move the needle. But David, I kind of went to our conversations about going into the report about thinking that there were going to be some changes in acreage numbers.
Right, because there were some changes in the acreage numbers. My goodness, look at the acreage on corn, 82.710. Last year, look at this, 86.513. Now, the trade guess was just barely above what the USDA had, 82.967. Look at the yield. Everybody's thinking it should be around 182. No, it was 183.1. Now others are saying, no, it's going to be better than that, 184, 185. And the production, 15.147. A year ago was 15.342. Look at this. We even have a lesser corn crop size this year than last year. But look on soybeans. On the yield, 53.2.
Wow.
And the trade guess, 52.5. July was 52. And last year was 50.6, to give you an idea. On the harvested area, 86,271. The trade guess, look at this, was 85,110. They knew that was coming. And in July, it was 85,261. But look at last year, 82.352. And production, there it is, 4.589. I'll just round it up and call it 4.6. Okay. Trade guess was 4.469. Year ago was 4.165. I don't know about you guys, but I think that Rod Sterling's ancestors are working for the USDA and they're putting out the Twilight Zone right now.
Yeah. Hey, John, it's all about those yields that they bumped up. I mean, that's why we're seeing these production numbers just gone through the roof.
Yes, the report was a little bit on the startling side. Remember, the August report does not have any actual field measurements. It's all paper guessing. However, I didn't expect to see that big of an increase in the yields. Not yet. I thought that would show up maybe in September and October, but they surprised us again by bumping that corn yield up to that 183.1 number, and soybeans at 53.2. That's a pretty significant increase from just a month ago. And then these acres numbers are kind of startled me. We picked up 1 million planted bean acres and we lost 800,000 corn acres. I don't know why we should be startled, guys, because the numbers, the economics kept saying all winter plant beans are more profitable. So the producer did exactly what he should do. He switched a lot of acres from corn over to soybeans. But the most startling number of all in this report, that projected carryover for new crop beans, the 24-25 carryover, is projected 560 million bushels. Just from a month ago, it was 435. Yeah. And now we're well over 500 million. And the August weather so far has been pretty favorable. It wouldn't surprise me if that yield on beans went even a little higher. And we're staring at a 600 million type of a carryover. And the market has responded accordingly. We've had a sharp down week in soybeans. But Rob, is it over yet, or are we still going lower?
I don't know. That's the third highest ever, David.
Yes. And I'm thinking it's like they're saying out west in the areas that did have the flooding, this was the best crop they've ever had. It was the worst crop they ever had in some of these fields. About 15% of the crop was hurt by the flooding, but 85% was helped out. And look at the yield numbers. Illinois, 225 on corn, and some are saying it'll be 230. Indiana, look at us, 207. And Iowa, 209 on the corn. On the beans, we're looking Indiana 62. That's a new record. Look at this. Look at Illinois 66. My goodness. Yikes. and Iowa 61, guys. They're talking about this all these years, that there's 600 bushels of corn in a bag of seed corn.
Getting close.
Yes, it is.
207 for Indiana versus 209 in Iowa. Historically, Indiana is never that close to Iowa.
Right. But, John, you were talking about the difference between Indiana and Ohio. Now, there's a big discrepancy there. What is that about?
I don't know. I'm startled by that one. Indiana at 207, Ohio at 188. What? That's a 19 bushel difference. And I've heard reports out of Ohio. Granted, their conditions have not been quite as good as ours have been, but not that far behind. Mostly good reports I hear. And the soybean discrepancy wasn't all that great. That doesn't make sense to me at all.
Look at Indiana and look at Northeast Indiana, because we had problems planting both corn and then somewhat for beans. But Ohio had worse problems than we did. Some parts of Ohio were too wet and some parts were too dry. And that really, I think, stymied the farmers because they wanted to get out and plant. You talked to them last spring and they told you, I can't get out in the field. And that happened in Ohio, too.
It's just that big discrepancy. That's the part that's such a big question mark, particularly when we get the word this week. John, you can speak to this more than I can because of the connections that you've got all across the Corn Belt. Group 2 beans, I'm hearing in central Indiana, they're only about 2 weeks away from starting harvest.
So, I heard the same thing, that yes, in maybe 2 or 3 weeks in Indiana and Illinois, even sooner than that. I mean, they're seeing some yellowing occur over in parts of central Illinois, and they've gotten rains at the right time. So I am a little nervous about where this bean deal is going to end up. And there's talk out there now of sub $9 beans at some point. You guys buy into that or not?
Definitely, because you have to look at history on this, and you have to look at the season, not for growing corn, but for growing beans. And the double cropping, we talked about that. I think it's a very favorable year for double crop beans and for soybeans, and I think the lower prices definitely are in order.
Yeah, and again, the corn numbers came out a little bit better than expected, on the crop report. At least the carryover numbers were not as low as we feared, since they took away 800,000 acres. Even though the yield went up, they also increased demand on corn, by the way, by a total of 60 million bushels. So the corn carryover stayed under 2.1 billion. Now, we may see that go a little higher as the yield goes up later in the season if that occurs, but the corn kind of got stabilized. But one thing that the market is telling us right now, guys, too, is one of the jobs of the market is going to be to get acres back into corn and out of soybeans. We have too many soybeans. At the same time, we're seeing demand from China declined, hurting the export market. So demand is down, production is up. We got to get more soybeans into corn next year. So that ratio, which is still hanging around 2.44, someone there, it's got to narrow in. It's got to really kick soybeans to do it. I hate to say that, but it's got to get the producer to shift acres back into corn next year.
I am baffled by any conversation that's coming out of USDA that has increases in demand. Every time I see that, David, I'm asking myself, where? In any event, there was some demand this past week. And we started out the week, not just with the WASDE report, David, but also just a basket full of flash sales.
Yeah, 165,000 tons of corn and 300,000 tons, both old crop and new, of soybeans. Then later in the week, we did see more interest. Exporters were selling to China. Soybeans, 132,000 came out. And then we also saw 137,600 to Mexico. And get a load of this, guys. Beat the horn for this one. Egypt's bidding right now for 30 cargoes of wheat. They're trying to load up on wheat, especially with the Russian problems that are going on with their gluten content over there and the drought problems they had in parts of Ukraine and Russia. And then also it's too wet in Europe. They're one of the worst wheat crops they've ever had, especially France. So we don't talk much about the wheat, but at the same time, it's going to see the wheat, I think, giving some underlying support in the corn as we've seen recently.
Yeah, boy, that French wheat crop, that worst or the smallest, well, you can call it the worst, I guess, since the 1980s, David. So that was pretty rugged.
Yes, since 1986, this is the worst wheat crop. And they said if you look at it in terms of history, it's like the third worst wheat crop since the 1850s.
Wow.
It's really, really hugging the bottom line there on that wheat crop. Yeah, the French are really up. And the Germans are too. There's pictures on Twitter of wheat that was underwater in parts of Germany.
Yeah.
It was trying to swim.
I saw one of those pictures with just the head sticking up above the waves,
Yeah.
David, the lean hog futures got a nice little bump on Thursday, but then on Friday, Friday, kicked in the head again, down $1.50, $1.55. And I've said it before, but I'm gratified at the extent to which pork is getting featured at the grocery store. And the prices, at the grocery store at least, are some of the best for any of the meat choices out there right now.
Yeah. The story is, though, that the beef export sales set a marketing year high. That was a really plus sign for this. Pork's not getting the demand that we were expecting to see. And the cash markets right now are acting soft for both pork or hogs and cattle. And I think that's what's giving the markets reason to try and sell off. Plus, the feeder pigs took a bit of a drop here as they're saying, look, we're going to feed this feed that's going to be available. It's going to be cheaper. So the feeder cattle market's been dropping off because they're saying, well, why should I buy more feeder cattle when I can't get the corn hauled to me like I like to?
Well, that's why I'm getting pork ribs. It's such a good deal. Time for the final word. But John, I'm sorry, I got to pull it from you this week and just throw it out there for us to talk about because the Pro Farmer Crop Tour starts this next week. And we look out the back door and then we hear these numbers about a 207 bushel yield coming out of Indiana. And I'm thinking to myself, but are you going to be surprised if it's 210? Because we've seen some pretty huge crops. You've been around and take a look at it.
I know. We've had some of the most favorable weather for pollination that I can recall in many years. We've had rain just at the right time. We've had excellent subsoil moisture in most of the Midwest. Indiana in particular, we've had almost perfect weather here, slightly below average temps for the most part, which is perfect for corn pollination. So to think these yields are going to go higher, and they always say, by the way, that big crops get bigger. I think we are looking at bigger numbers down the road. So this Pro Farmer Tour is going to be especially interesting to see their numbers. Now, I know that typically this tour starts a little too early, but it's still very interesting. And one of the reasons it sold off again on Friday was because the market is fearful of this Pro Farmer Tour, thinking that bigger yield numbers are going to come out of it. So they're just kind of running scared at the moment. And do you think, guys, that by chance that maybe we'll get some kind of a clear up on the discrepancy between Indiana and Ohio?
Oh, yeah. I would expect that.
That's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Yeah. And David, do you think that the Pro Farmer Crop Tour is going to justify some of the numbers in the Wadsley report?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because I saw another picture this week of a 5-bean pod that came out of a field. So that Pro Farmer Tour is actually going to give us highlights of it because for the most part, the USDA is kind of stuck using the numbers and also using the satellite data. It's just going to look gigantic from the air.
Well, we're looking forward to those numbers for next week, and we will have them for you and discuss them all coming up next week right here. Kohli and Cavanaugh made possible each week by support from the Allen County Farm Bureau. And I know your local county farm bureaus are supporting Indiana agriculture every single day. And to keep up with that, Indiana Farm Bureau members can sign up for The Dispatch, the electronic newsletter that is sent out weekly during the legislative session and every other week the rest of the year. Topics covered in recent issues include the Farm Bill and updates from Farm Bureau task forces. To start getting The Dispatch, all you got to do is go online to infb.org. Just another one of the great benefits you get from your membership. Go online to itpaystobeamember.org.
Podcasts by Federated Media.